Warning, this content may be disturbing to some audiences. Subscribe, if you dare. I was gasping for air just from the intensity of the whole thing. Hey everybody, welcome to ANECDOSED. People ask Reddit. Redditors who had arranged marriage. Was sex awkward initially? How did you break the ice? Number 1. My parents and aunt arranged a marriage for me and I traveled back to my country. Met her once before the marriage. First night she was really shy and kept hiding under the blanket and pulling it away from me while giggling. Nothing happened that night. When we were in bed watching television innocently the next day, she looked at me and said maybe the first complete sentence, "I don't know what I'm supposed to do," in a nervous voice. So I laughed and played it funny, then started gently kissing, hugging, and joked a bit. Then 2 hours later we are doing it and now I've 2 kids from her and she turned 26 last month. Arranged isn't as bad as it sounds, but back in my place it's normal to have arranged marriages and even marriages without seeing the bride. Number 2. I'm from California and had an arranged marriage to a German guy, when I was 18. I grew up in the Family Federation for World Peace, aka the Unification Church, aka the Moonies. Our parents set us up and we emailed for 4 months before we attended the blessing marriage ceremony. We met in person only a few weeks before we were married, and we both liked each other a lot. Definitely one of those cheesy love at first sight kind of experiences. We had sex for the first time only a week or so after getting married. We had a mini honeymoon in Vienna, and were pretty much in bed the whole time. Overall, the entire experience was fantastic and amazing and magical. It's been more than 5 years and I'm still head over heels in love with this guy. Number 3. I met my husband 3 months before my wedding. We went on a few dates before the wedding. How was the wedding night? Pretty nice. Since we'd both come directly from the wedding, we needed to shower. He took a shower first, then I did. It was about 2 a.m. before we finally got started. It wasn't awkward at all. A bit painful, but not really awkward. First orgasm came a few days later on a train in France for our honeymoon. 20 years later, we've got a house full of children to prove that the sex has been both enjoyable and plentiful. Number 4. We talked over the phone 3 months before we got married as we were both in different countries. I had read a lot about sex for the first time, which helped me prep up for the first night. This made it not awkward cause I knew how to make it comfortable for her. There was a lot of foreplay, so that made it less awkward. And she says that first night was the best sex she had of all times we had since then. Number 5. From a Muslim standpoint, I had an arranged marriage, but it really wasn't all that arranged. I met my wife through a family friend. We were introduced, our families were introduced, and we spent about a year getting to know each other. Both of us, at either point, could have decided we were not interested, but we fell very much in love and got married. We discussed sex, contraception, etc. prior to getting married, so it wasn't a foreign topic. When we finally ended up having sex, day after our wedding night, we were way too exhausted that night. We took our time and went slow. It was very much enjoyable for both of us and we have sex nearly daily now, a year in. We were both virgins and had zero experience doing anything sexual with the opposite sex. Looking back now, I am really glad I got to experience all of that with her and only her. It makes it that much more special to me. Number 6. The first time we had sex. I will not lie. It was awkward, but not nearly as awkward as I expected it to be. Our wedding night was spent holding hands and stroking fingers, and we slowly progressed to hugging. I had no previous physical contact with men and no intimate touching before, and even holding hands was intense. I was gasping for air just from the intensity of the whole thing. Eventually we progressed to sex. It was a little awkward at first, but not as awkward as I expected it to be. This was my husband, and he was sweet, patient and cautious. He was concerned about hurting me. I reached out to hold his hands during intercourse. It made me feel closer to him. We were in this together. I treasure those first memories spent together and reminisce often. In summary, it was a bit awkward, although I am sure that losing my virginity to a high school crush at 16 would be miles more awkward. Breaking the ice. Well, that took a few weeks to fully happen. I did not feel comfortable undressing in front of my new spouse for probably a good 3 months. Gradually, slowly, we warmed up. And there is not one part of the process I regret. Number 7. My husband's family made an arrangement with my father when I was 12 that I would marry their middle son, who was 2 years older than me when I was 18 and had finished school. I grew to like him a lot. I wouldn't go so far as to say that I loved him. I grew to love him eventually, and he was a very nice, caring, sweet guy and treated me well. He supported me going to university. We had a good life together. We loved traveling together. We both loved photography. We had been talking about having kids when I was finished with university. We weren't married very long, only 2 years before he died in a car accident. I think we could have made things work with more time. As far as your question, sex was fine. We were both virgins when got married. I tried doing what I saw in porn, but it didn't work out too well, but like all things, we got better with practice. Number 8. First night was super awkward. She barely spoke a word, then went to sleep. I just lay there, eyes wide open, thinking what the hell is going on. She woke up eventually and we spoke a little, started kissing. So far so good. I had all sorts of lube with me, so wipe that out. When we began foreplay, it was really just me doing everything. When we got to the penetration, it was way too painful for her, so I stopped, lay next to her and said we could take as long as she needed. Ended up not having sex for 2 weeks. Just a lot of foreplay, but once she got comfortable, oh my days! It was rough, hot, sweaty sex, mainly because of the heat, much less sexual stamina, for the rest of the time. She loves it when I go down on her as I did. The best thing though was after the sex, the way she would just stare at me for eternity. That would totally crush me. I miss that the most. And I totally love her. We have the greatest chats, same sense of humor, and totally know how to piss each other off. Number 9. My wife and I had an arranged marriage, which was pretty textbook. We met once before we got engaged. Met 4 more times, once on Valentine's Day, once on her birthday, once on mine, before we got married 4 months later. It's funny, but it wasn't awkward at all for us. My wife was a bit nervous, but we were pretty hot for each other from day one. So smooth sailing all the way. Number 10. My wife is from a Muslim country originally, but her family is from the capital and quite modern. She has relatives, however, from a smaller village who are not quite as modern. So one of her second cousins, son of dad's cousin, wants to get married because it is time already and he wants children. The groom was a very traditional Muslim man. He had never had a date, never gone out with a girl, and followed his religion in a very strict way. He had barely talked to women in the past. The bride has followed a similar path. So they finish the ceremony, they go to the room, and they realize they have absolutely no idea how to proceed. Like, these people did not know how to have sex. They had never watched a porn film, they never had sex education, no one thought to tell them what they would have to do in bed. They are there wondering what to do now, so they call this aunt, who is the eldest of the family, to tell them what to do. But the aunt feels that a woman cannot possibly describe to a man how to have sex. That is so inappropriate, so instead she calls her younger brother, my father-in-law. Also, there must be many others more suitable for that kind of thing. At this point, my wife and her mom and sister are cracking up because they cannot believe this is happening in 2013, and the thing is, no one expected this, otherwise they would have taken precautions. Like a week later, my wife comes and tells me that apparently something happened, because the next day the bride was seen walking funny, and apparently they had to contact a gynecologist because something had happened during the wedding night that actually hurt the poor girl. We never got to know what it was that he did, or they tried, that went wrong, or the outcome after. Keep in mind, this is really embarrassing for them, so they tried to keep it as low as possible. Number 11. I was getting fed up with the dating scene and told my dad that maybe getting married from India wouldn't be such a bad idea. He signed me up for a matrimonial site for Indians. I met my wife by chance on this thing while she was working in Dubai. I had a little anxiety attack the week before I flew out to India to meet her, but I convinced myself that I had no less than a 50-50 shot that this would turn out great for me, and carried on. We met, and on my wedding day we stayed until 1 in the morning to party, and we went to the room. I knew we were both thinking about it, but no one said anything. She sat on one side of the bed nervously looking through her bag. I got up and did what I thought would be a pretty clear sign. I took off my shoes and socks, took off my shirt, and went into the bathroom and ran the water. I stood there for about 5 minutes silently as I waited for her to follow. She didn't. I took a shower with the door slightly ajar, waiting for her to come in. She didn't. I stood behind that door ass naked and tried to get her to come in by asking for a towel. She stuck her arm through the door, gave me the towel, and sat back down. In bed after, she sat next to me in silence under the covers. 5 minutes of silence before I decided to try tickling her side. She grabbed my hand and I felt her hold it, so I rolled over and planted one on her mouth. She kissed back like the first girl I ever kissed. Extremely fumbly heavy petting from both sides eventually ended up in shirts and pants being taken off. Number 12. My mom said she had thought about the possibility of me marrying my cousin. I'm of Pakistani descent. I was born in the UK as was my mum, but my dad is from Pakistan. In Pakistani culture, it is not expected that your children go out and date or whatever. Standard practice is usually for parents of the children to discuss marriage plans on behalf of the children, and the level of involvement varies between cultures, ethnicity, religion, etc. I was initially pretty grossed out by it, but she asked me to mull over the decision for a while. A couple of months later, my mum said that my aunt said that my cousin, now wife, is willing to chat to me about it if I am. Turns out she was actually playing me at this point, because my wife hadn't been told about this at all, but my aunt was potentially on board with the possibility, so she did this to get me to make up my mind quickly. Which I did, and I agreed to meet at some point. After all, she was hot. Yeah, I know that sounds gross to you. We met up and had the most awkward first date ever conceived in the history of mankind, where basically we discussed virtually every aspect of normal dating into one 3-hour dinner where we basically discussed our likes, dislikes, what we find attractive in the other person, personality traits, etc. Like I said, super awkward. At the end of the dinner, we had literally agreed to marry each other, which was the surrealist experience of my life. About 2 weeks after our engagement, we had been talking a bit, and I sent her some semi-lewd innuendo texts, which eventually blew into full-blown sexting. The actual wedding night, the sex wasn't awkward per se, the actual act was. Like physically doing it after talking about it for almost a year, but in terms of breaking the ice or anything, we didn't have that problem because we were super horny for each other at this point. Make sure to share your personal story in the comments below and have the opportunity to be featured in a future video. Also, if you like these topics, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification button to continue seeing more content like this every day. See you next time.